TV 34? Okay, I guess we're ready to get started. Okay.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Planning Board. In accordance with the New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided, excuse me, by posting a copy of the notice on the first floor of the municipal building and by sending a copy to the newspaper designated by the township for notices. The electronic notice of this meeting has also been provided by posting a copy of the meeting notice along with meeting access instructions on the township website and also on the main access door of the municipal building. This meeting is being broadcast live on channel 34 and is streaming live and will be available on demand on YouTube. This meeting is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning that the board has powers and procedures resembling a court of law, and that we are obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from them based on information that is provided to us so that we may take official action. Any questions or comments must be limited to those which we are legally allowed to consider in reaching our decision, and decorum appropriate for a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. In this digital format, members of the public are automatically placed on mute until such time as the meeting is open for public questions or comments. At that time, members of the public will be unmuted and they may provide verbal questions or comments as appropriate. If that is not possible because our equipment is not cooperating, then questions can also be directed to Ms. Talley, the board secretary, via the chat function on our WebEx app, or by emailing Ms. Talley at jtalley, that's JTALLEY, at Montclair, NJUSA, one word, .org. Again, that's jtalley at Montclair, USA, Montclair, New Jersey, USA, NJUSA.org. Tonight we have a hearing on an application, and during that hearing, the public will be allowed to ask questions at the appropriate time, and will also be allowed to offer comment on the entire hearing at the end of the proceeding. So with that, first thing on our agenda this evening is our roll call. I am here.
Vice Chair Brodock.
I'm here and I've logged in. If you can promote me, Janice, thank you.
Okay. Oh, yes, I see you. Let me, there we go. Okay. Mayor Spiller.
Present.
Mr. Cook.
Present.
Counselor Schlager.
Here.
Miss Willis. I don't think she's, I think hopefully she's still trying to log on. Mr. Rooney.
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally.
Here.
Ms. Lockman.
Here.
And Mr. Gilmer is excused.
Okay.
Okay.
Excuse me. The minutes from our January 11th meeting.
So we've received changes to the minutes from Vice Chair Brodock and Ms. Lockman. Are there any other changes to the minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
All right, next we have two resolutions. First one for Montclair Medical Property Association.
We've had changes to that resolution have been made by Vice Chair Brodock and Ms. Lockman. There's some minor questions. I don't really think that they change the content or the importance of the meeting.
I just had one quick question, probably for Arthur.
Yeah.
The resolution says that it doesn't preclude the applicant from coming back to get a freestanding sign. If it's in accordance with the ordinance. The ordinance currently says you get either or. So I don't, it's probably okay. I suppose that exists because if the ordinance changes, it doesn't preclude them. Would that be the interpretation of that?
That's one interpretation, and not that I want to throw the chair under the bus, but I went back over the final verbiage, and John, when you went through the list of conditions, that was one of the things that you actually said, that the applicant could come back to the board with an appropriate application. I'm not sure that answers your question, Tony, but that was why that was put in and that was based upon.
Yeah, so in other words, they could come in provided it's allowed by the ordinance, or they could come in and try again for variance or something like that. Okay.
Sure.
All right, got it. All right, thanks.
I believe that there.
Go ahead.
I believe there was some questions to Arthur on item 11 in that resolution about the tents.
Yeah, I don't have it right in front of me at this moment, but if you could just tell me what it said, I might be able to comment on it.
Well, it should be, you say the benefits of the branch of the requested relief, and the recommendation is it should be benefits of the grant, not branch.
Probably.
Grant of, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's in a couple places in that, so we'll just change branch to grant. Okay.
Well, not really, because
Not everywhere.
as I explained to one board member, this notion of branch arises from motion practice in court. If someone comes before a court and is seeking two separate forms of relief, attorneys generally refer to it as two branches of the same motion. If it's alternative relief, that's a different question. But this applicant was requesting two forms of relief, or two branches of relief, one for the sign and one for the impervious coverage. So that's why it was included there. With regard to paragraph 11, I would probably buy into the notion of making it grant rather than branch.
Okay. I think it's clearer if we use grant in this instance, in that paragraph.
Yeah, those were my suggestions, and I thought the grant seemed to make sense. And I think I had never heard the term branches of relief. So I spoke with Arthur and he explained that to me. So
Okay.
I'm happy with that change.
Okay. With that change and the other changes that were distributed, is there a motion to approve the resolution?
So move.
Moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. The next resolution is the resolution granting a lot line adjustment for, I think it's the right page here.
21 Vera Place.
Yep, 21 Vera Place. There were some minor, I think, very minor drafting changes to that resolution. So is there a motion to approve the resolution as amended?
Moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. And we have 1/3 resolution. It was a late addition to the agenda. And that's the resolution to retain Eric Bernstein as, Oh, no, I'm sorry, not Eric Bernstein. This is to retain, Dennis Galvin to continue to represent the board in the litigation regarding Lackawanna Plaza.
I had some suggested changes to that.
Okay,
Okay, so the first paragraph, the first whereas, the second line, experts and staff as it may deem necessary at a cost not exceeding the amount appropriated. Got that? Experts and staff as it may deem necessary, comma, at a cost not exceeding, no comma, the amount appropriated by the governing body for its use.
okay, I got that.
And the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think it's the sixth whereas,
Okay,
the second line, it's the subject to the adoption of the 2021 municipal budget. Do you need 2 adoptions in there?
no, we could get rid of the second one.
Okay, and that's it.
Okay, a motion to approve the resolution as amended.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay.
All right, and that brings us to the application of Montclair Acquisition Partners.
John, and may I ask a favor if this is okay with the applicant? I'm recused from this. Do you think it's possible to run through the zoning? I'm on the zoning committee. Do you think we could do the committee report, sneak that ahead of the application, if possible? And then I will go.
All right, well, that shouldn't be too long, right?
Shouldn't take long.
I think we can get that out of the way.
Thank you.
I do have 2 questions since we're going to start that topic. Janice, you had sent us copies of the planner. And it seemed in the planner, just looking ahead here, there is going to be some changes in our, I think it's the master plan edits to include a section on climate change. Is that correct?
Are you talking about in the municipal land use law?
Right.
I'm talking about, so that's something we'll need to think ahead about. Okay, right. And the second thing, once again, looking at the planner, was, I don't know if you could address this. It seems like the municipality can enact an ordinance to prohibit cannabis operations if it wants. Is this something that we're going to look at or not?
This is something that the council has discussed previously. And it was part of the reason why we updated our drug-free school zone map. So, but we have not discussed that probably within the last year.
Well, it strikes me that we have the option at this point to have an ordinance that directly addresses the management of cannabis in town. And on one, I don't know if that's something we want to put on our to-do list as an actual ordinance change or clarification.
I have to reach out to the council and find out. I think it's best to reach out to the council to see if that's something that they're interested in looking into.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going to change the order of the items on the agenda and talk about the zoning ordinance changes. So what I had distributed was a memo summarizing the changes that we've made to their zoning ordinance or have not made since we did the master plan reexamination report in 2016. There was a lot of work that went on at the subcommittee level. We started with an complete overhaul of our zoning ordinance because it is just pieced together since it was originally adopted in 1919. But that the council did not feel comfortable doing a complete overhaul of the zoning ordinance. So we went back and did it piecemeal, and even doing it in a piecemeal approach. Our latest ordinance, which was ordinance 19-030, was withdrawn by the council. So I think there's a lot that we need to do, but I think we need to do it in smaller increments so that the council can understand the impact of the changes. And what I would suggest is that we prioritize those changes that we want to make and do them incrementally, because I think what happens is if there's, with that last ordinance that we drafted, which was 19-030, which I attached to my memo, there is something in there, or a couple things that in there that the council was not comfortable with, so the whole ordinance was withdrawn. I think it's probably easier to do it in small pieces, so you get the things that you really want to get adopted, and then you can continue to work on the things that were not.
Right.
I have a question for you. So myself, Carol, and Tony are on the zoning ordinance, zoning subcommittee.
Yes.
Is there a priority that the council wants us to look at first?
No. I'm asking, I have not asked the council to look into the zoning ordinance. I'm asking you, what do you think is most important? And we can proceed. We've got two members of the council, actually two members of the economic subcommittee who are also part of the planning board. And if there's any things that any priorities that they have in terms of zoning changes, I can certainly address that. But at this point, before this board, I'm looking to hear what you think is most important. And not that you have to tell me tonight. Okay, we can certainly, my recommendation would be to start with some of the things that were in that the original ordinance 019-030 and try and proceed, because I know the requirements for accessory structures and rooftop equipment were pretty important at the planning board level. So I think,
Janice, how about if we do this? I mean, it's hard to do this in a vacuum. I think we should get some feedback as to what's objectionable.
I think we have a different composition of the council right now. So I think, I don't think you're going to get that feed. This was done 2 years ago.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at too. What do they really want us to focus on? That we're getting.
And I can't tell you that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
One question for you. Did the how about when did the change in C6 height? That was done a long time ago, right? Was that, where is that?
What do you mean C6?
I'm sorry. What's the, not C6? What's the highest rooftop allowable zone? What is that zone called?
The C1 zone, the 6 stories in the C1 zone.
Yeah. So there was some discussion about height. Where is that? Was that withdrawn or?
That was withdrawn.
That was withdrawn. Is that withdrawn within these changes? Because I don't see height.
Height's not in here. The council at that point did not want to change the height of the C1 zone.
Oh, so that was a separate withdrawal a while ago. Okay.
Right. That went with the first round of zoning changes that we proposed, and it was felt that it was not I was told at that time it was not necessary, because outside of redevelopment, the property owners cannot build to 6 stories because they can't provide the parking. That was the feedback I got from the council when that was originally, or certain members of the council, and why that change did not advance. And that was prior to the 2019 ordinances.
So Janice, I have a question for you on the information that you attached, the zoning ordinance changes. It would be easier to look at a red line version. I'm not sure what version I'm looking at. The one that we had suggested changes to, or the one that's unchanged?
You mean the ordinance?
Yeah, I'm looking at your January 15th.
all right, I can see if I can find the red line version. What the council what they like to see is they like to see clean versions, not the red line. And
Two, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
So does this encompass the changes that the zoning subcommittee
Yes.
recommended?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So if it does, then the new council would have no idea what we're changing though, unless they see a red line version. I mean, I always like to see what the original was and then what we're changing.
Right. And we always have a red line version, but what the council ultimately presents to the public is the clean version, so.
Absolutely, yeah. But, I mean, if I were them, I'd want to see the progress of the thought that went into the ordinance development or changes.
Yeah. So, what we could do is I can distribute, my suggestion is to distribute this again as a series, take ordinance 019-030, break it down into separate ordinances, distribute it to the zoning subcommittee, which also includes 2 members of the zoning board as well, to get feedback about those changes. You've seen it before. I just want to make sure we all agree on it again, and then introduce that bring that back to the council for consideration.
That makes sense.
And then once we get that done, then we can start moving on I mean, there's a whole list of changes here that need to be made, and we can start working on the other ones. Okay?
So then what you're doing is you're taking the same thing that was presented before to a different council and break it in bite-sized pieces.
Even further, yes.
So, but suppose this were presented to the current council it's one document, but is there is there a committee at the council level that can meet with the zoning and planning boards to discuss these changes instead of kind of tossing the ball back and forth?
Generally, Tony, the zoning ordinance changes move through the Economic Development Committee.
Well, how about if members of the Economic Development Committee meet with us?
You've got 2 members.
We have a dialogue around the table and we can sort of understand and work at it together. Otherwise, we're sort of tossing the ball back and forth in a vacuum.
I think what I can do is I'll arrange a meeting. We already have 2 members, the Mayor Spiller and Councilor Schlager are 2 of the 3 members of the Economic Development Committee. So they're familiar with it.
Who's the 3rd member?
Peter Jacobellis.
Well, if we have the 3 of us, we can't have a quorum, right? If the 3 members of the zoning committee of the planning board.
Then, right, that's the problem.
So, you could have Peter Jacobellis, right? He wouldn't interfere with that. And you could have, there are other members of the Economic Development Committee, right? That could sit and not cause a problem with the quorum.
It's just 3 members. The only other person is Peter.
Oh, well, isn't there there's an economic development, those minutes that were circulated in error? There's an economic development something. What is that?
That's the Economic Development Committee.
So there's only 3 people on that?
Uh-huh. I mean, there's staff that tends to be there.
It's a subcommittee of the
council. Yes. That's how you get, if you want to get a resolution or an ordinance through the council, you have to go to the appropriate committee.
Okay.
And for land use, we go to the Economic Development Committee.
So I guess it would just be Peter then, right, to not cause a problem with,
right.
Or we have two of us, one of us could not go or something, but it seems better just to talk.
That's true. So let me work through our committee first, okay? And then we move it through the Economic Development Committee. I think that the key thing is not the Economic Development Committee when it goes to the full council, because I can't predict the kind of questions that will come from the full council. It might be better. I think that's the meeting that we'd really want people from the planning board and or the zoning board to help support the changes. Okay. So, we'll move ahead with starting making those changes as discussed. Are there any other comments on the zoning ordinance changes? Okay.
So you'll set up a meeting, Janice, with the zoning board
Yep.
subcommittee, or the
Yep.
zoning subcommittee. Yep, thank you.
All right, Tony?
Yeah, thank you very much for switching the order. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
But you're
Okay.
not done yet. You
Oh.
have to, we're looking at the zoning board's annual report.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's part of your
Well, I think a lot of the comments in the zoning board's annual report refer to those changes that were proposed and were never made.
That's true, but I have one question. It said this is a very broad recommendation that the zoning board is making, number 3, right? The board recommends that the governing body act to implement all recommendations of the adopted land use and circulation element of the master plan as soon as possible. So that's an amazingly broad
Yeah.
mandate.
So Carmel, since Bill Harrison and Joe Fleischer are a member of the zoning subcommittee, you can ask them that question when we meet.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we have anything else to discuss about that? Anyone? If not, then Tony, thank you again. We'll see you later. And let's move on
Good night,
to,
everyone. Have a good night. Bye.
yeah, you have a good night too. Let's move on to the application for Montclair Acquisition Partners.
All right. Tom, I can't.
Hi. Hi, Janice.
Hi, Tom. It appears that I can't make you a panelist. I don't know what it is about your connection. But I can unmute you.
So you can hear me, but you can't see me. So also somewhere on here should also be Brian Barry.
Okay, I can make Brian Barry a panelist.
Great. Michelle Bryhoff.
Okay.
Joe Casillo.
Yep.
Kristen Sokich.
Okay.
And Tim Tracy.
Okay, I was able to make all of them panelists.
Everyone but me.
Everyone but you.
I can proceed at the board's pleasure. I can proceed, I guess, in voice only, but if you'd like, I could try to log back out and log back in. I'm not sure what happened.
I would also like to note for the record, Carol Willis is now in attendance.
Janice, you're coming through with echo as well.
Yeah, I'm going to mute myself. Okay, so Tom, I think you're good to go.
Okay.
If we're good, if you want to proceed like this, it's fine. I would ask that everybody else turn off your microphones because we are echo, and that'll be caused.
Yeah, Tom, I don't know what kind of audio system you have, but I think it's coming from you.
So I'm logged in through my computer. I can turn my audio off, I guess, and try and dial in by phone if that'll help.
Let me ask. Let's see. Tony Fan, are you here? Or he might be gone. Rick, I don't know if you have any suggestions on how to handle the audio problem. All right, Tom, did you hear that?
Yeah. All right. So And I could also try a different computer. Sometimes that helps.
Okay.
Yeah, if you email me a link, Jen, if I indulge everybody, I apologize for the delay. I'll try to switch computers and see if that helps.
Let me, it is T. Trepner at csglaw.com. So Tom, I just emailed you another link, and I think you're going to get one from Rick, who manages TV 34.
Thanks.
How's it coming, Tom?
Just typing in the password right now.
Okay. Oh, that's awful.
Sorry, computer's on right now.
Okay, Tom, I made you a panelist. I was able to make you a panelist. Yep, there you are.
Appreciate everybody's patience.
That's much better. Okay, good.
Great.
All right.
So good evening, everyone. And Mr. Chairman, if appreciate. So we're here on behalf of Montclair Acquisition Partners. This is a minor site plan application seeking approval to remove what was a previously approved lift and slide mechanism for parking in the garage. And as a result of removing that lift and slide, to expand the slabs, if you will, of the floor plates on floors 2 to 5 to increase parking capacity to attempt to address a loss of parking spaces. We'll come back to that in a moment. So this, just for orientation, this concerns block 1408 Lot 18. The property is part of Montclair Center's Gateway Phase 1 redevelopment plan. And we have a number of witnesses tonight. We have Brian Barry on behalf of the applicant. We have Michelle Bryhoff from Mazer, who previously submitted a report, who could speak to parking study. We have Tim Tracy from Desmond Engineering, who can speak to the actual physical changes with respect to the garage design. And we have also with us Kristen Sokic from Pro Park America to talk about how we're going to attempt to address the change in the number of parking spaces or losses of parking spaces as a result of that lift and slide no longer being there. As you'll hear in testimony from Mr. Barry in just a few moments, simply put, the applicant cannot proceed with the lift and slide from an engineering and candidly even a safety standpoint. But what you'll hear in testimony is that although the number of spaces in the garage, if you were to include that lift and slide mechanism, is going to reduce from 614 spaces to 550 spaces. This is going to still provide adequate capacity for use of the garage based upon data that we have pre-COVID while the hotel was open in terms of the number of cars that were coming in and out of that garage, again, even with the hotel open. And that we can also address through valet parking, which is something that was contemplated and approved as part of the original July 2012 approval of the garage, along with the entire Valley Room or Central Verde redevelopment, that we can address higher demands for parking were prior projections ever to become the reality, which we don't think they would, but they could, as the board may suggest, and certainly in terms of level G's parking analysis, in terms of what it projects, we should be able to address as a peak parking demand. The board may recall we were last here in 2017 to obtain approval in conjunction with certain facade elements and design for the garage that led to a resolution on June 12, 2017 for that approval. We are not making any changes to the facade of the building or exterior to the garage whatsoever as part of tonight's application. And we're also not seeking to change the location of any of the Board of Education parking spaces. I think the board is aware there are 78 parking spaces that the redevelopment plan contemplates for the Board of Education. There's a specific parking license agreement between Montclair Acquisition Partners and the township that provides that 48 of those spaces are 48 of the 78 are basically available for the Board of Ed when they need them. And there's an additional 30, so that totals up to 78 that are leased back by the township to Montclair Acquisition Partners for Montclair Acquisition Partners to use. The lease agreement talks about the fact that the 78 parking spaces are not on the ground floor of the building. But again, we're not seeking to address any relocation of those spaces. We don't see the parking license agreement, its terms or those issues as really something we can or should get into this evening. But we can address any questions you may have about the Board of Education spaces in terms of how they play into capacity and demand as we get through the application. So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I would first ask Mr. Brian Barry from the applicant to be sworn in. We're not seeking to qualify him as an expert witness. We just want to have him testify as a representative of the applicant, again, with your permission.
See.
And Brian, are you here? There we go.
Yes.
Okay, Arthur, do you want to swear Brian in?
I will. Sir, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Would you please state your full name and business affiliation for the record?
Sure. I'm Brian Barry, Senior Vice President at Elcor.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Barry, you're familiar with the subject of the application that's before the board this evening?
Yes.
And you've been working on this matter from the perspective of Montclair Acquisition Partners in terms of your position there for in excess of a year. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, that is correct.
So with that, and not to stand on too much ceremony, Mr. Barry, could you, I guess, provide the board with, I guess, an explanation in terms of why we're here, why the need to eliminate the lift and slide mechanism?
Sure. And I appreciate everyone's time this evening. I just want to provide some context regarding the past, or at least what I've been involved in, and as it relates to the application being presented here this evening. So when I started working on this project, the buildings were delivered and had been stabilized. The lift and slide system was already under construction, and the facade was largely designed and moving through the approval process. So I inherited the work that was either already underway or in process, and my task was to finish that job or see it through. And my preference would be that I'm not here tonight with this request. It would be that the project was completed as it was supposed to have been on time and some time ago. But for reasons beyond our control, it was not. The project has, and specifically the completion of the garage and the facade, has consumed a significant amount of time and capital, both invested to date and future dollars. The facade, the lift and slide itself, unfortunately for legal reasons, I am very limited in what I can say, other than it is no longer a viable option for parking at the garage. A large percentage of the facade work has been advanced with the foundations and framing or structure in place. And the application this evening with this garage extension was a proposed solution to come back to the township with an opportunity to complete the garage so that we can continue to operate it in a safe and efficient manner and meet all existing demand, which we currently do, as with the garage capacity that we have, as well as future and projected demand based on both our professionals' analysis as well as the township's analysis. Long and short of it is that millions of dollars have been spent and will be spent when this is completed. So this is the solution we're proposing is not a shortcut. It's resulting in an additional investment in capital to see this through. But that was all I had before the professionals had an opportunity to speak this evening.
Mr. Troutner, you're still mute.
My apologies. Mr. Barry, you just noted a moment ago, I believe that for legal reasons, you couldn't get into too much detail, but it would be fair to state that in your understanding that the lift and slide mechanism would be potentially inoperable even if it were to be installed?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, that's actually the only questions I have for Mr. Barry, although I don't know that the board has questions. Certainly happy to entertain them now, and Mr. Barry will.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question.
I have a question, yes.
Go ahead, Carol.
I think that some explanation is needed with regard to the lift and slide, because the board was presented with a description of a system that was supposed to be effective and work, and we have now accepted that as the basis of the new building that's coming up next door. And so if it's not working, I think that it does make some sense for the board to hear exactly why it has to be abandoned as an approach.
I unfortunately, it's subject to litigation. So I would limit in what I can say is that the system cannot be completed. We have concerns about its operational safety, and it's not a viable option to continue to finish the garage. I wish I could come to you with more than that, but I am unfortunately limited in what I can say for legal reasons.
And
Barry, is the developer the plaintiff in the litigation?
Yeah.
So you can tell us what the allegations are. The complaint is not sealed, is it?
I don't know. I admittedly don't know.
Well, I think you need to find out to let us know. And Mr. Barry, I have a question for you. I would like you to explain why, when we explicitly base certain waivers and excuse me, variances on the facade placement and put easements in place, and specifically for this system. And now that you're not going to use the system, you're not proposing to revise any of the facade and to bring it back more in line with where it should be with the street. Is that my understanding of the proposal that we're going to hear tonight? Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. There's been several $100,000 have been invested in the foundation and the structure for the facade itself. And my understanding of
why is that relevant to us, the planning board?
There's been an so my understanding of the encroachment, which predates me, is there were 3 elements. One was 4 inches, which was the existing garage upon our inheritance. The next 8 inches were the lift and slide, which I and Tom can confirm, but I believe we paid for. And then the additional 8 inches were the facade design elements that were approved by the township.
Well, I'm just looking at where the footings were placed on this, and our approval of this design for the garage from the very beginning was based on the fact that this lift and slide system caused it to extend further out into the area than the previous structure. And why can't we return to the same footprint now as the previous structure? What's preventing that? Is it only money?
It's a significant amount of money, yes.
Mr. Chairman, from a legal standpoint, I guess what we'd be getting at is that we would have to basically take down, if I understand Mr. Barrett correctly, basically the front of the building and start over again. I think you would articulate from a hardship standpoint that would be a rather, I guess all things in life can be solved with money, but that would be a solution that would seem to defy reason in the sense of there's the approval that was granted in terms of the facade exterior. The board likes the facade exterior. There's no.
Mr. Troutman, the facade exterior was a compromise, and we were living with it based on the fact that we were told by the developer that this lift and slide system was the only way that we could get to the parking capacity. And the building sticks too far out into the right-of-way area. It's too close to the street. But we were willing to live with that as a compromise. And now the very basis of that compromise, you're removing from the equation. And basically you're telling us that it costs too much for the applicant to take down all that structure and move it back to where it was to the footprint of the original building. That's my understanding of basically what your client's going to tell us.
Mr. Chairman, yes, fairly candidly, this is the least worst solution. So certainly not something the applicant wanted to have happen. I think Mr. Barry has indicated that we're in litigation with.
But that has nothing to do with the township, and that has nothing to do with this building. That's the problem of the developer.
But the sidewalks in front of the building are full size, so there's no compromise in terms of pedestrian walkway. So that our point would be, we would, while you're technically correct that we
granted you variances and we granted you waivers, and the basis for that you're now removing. The basis for it you're removing.
But Mr. Chairman, I respect.
It's not like the building was built.
But Mr. Chairman, I feel like there's a suggestion that somehow this was a bait and switch. The applicant would much prefer to have
it at all. I'm not suggesting that it's a bait and switch at all. I'm suggesting that the only reason why you're here asking for this is because you don't want to pay to put it back. Because to put it to put it back, because the only reason why we approved it was so that it could accommodate this system. And now this system is not going to be a factor. So why can't it be put back? Because it costs. And I just want to understand that that's basically the be all end all of what you're saying.
But Mr. Chairman, I guess what I'd be saying from a hardship standpoint, to ask the applicant to incur potentially millions,
right, Mr. Troutner?
what it would cost potentially millions of dollars to do what you're suggesting.
Aren't you looking at a product defect claim that the manufacturer of the lift and slide would have insurance for? It's not like there's no remedy and coverage available for this type of defect. So it's not like it's coming out of your pocket. It's either insurance company or some other source. So look, I suppose if the board were to insist and somehow the applicant was ultimately forced to incur that would be an issue that would potentially take place in litigation between the applicant and the lift and slide operator. But again, from a standpoint of it's a 0-foot setback required along Orange Road. We've encroached past that setback because of the previous lift and slide mechanism and the need to accommodate some of 8 inches of the facade that was previously approved. A compromise between the board and the applicant.
Setback too, I think that we gave you a waiver on too, right?
I'm sorry.
And just for the record, the completion of the garage as proposed is going to cost us more money. So I'm not here this evening to try to find a way out of this to do so on the cheap. This actually is going to end up costing me more money at the end of the day, because I'm talking about having to remove an existing system where a lot of work was done and then go in and extend all of those slabs. So
we understand that it's going to cost money, but the problem is that we voted for a compromise, something that we didn't totally like, but we justified the compromise on the fact that it was needed for this particular system. And now the system is no longer in the picture. So the reason for the compromise is no longer in the picture. So we're left with a structure that we didn't wholeheartedly support, but we're willing to compromise on, and now the basis for that compromise is gone.
And as I had stated, that predated me, and I know I'm here on behalf of the applicant, so that doesn't, I understand that.
It makes no difference whether it predated you or not. It's the developer, and you're representing the developer, and whether you started yesterday or whether you started 5 years ago, that's the position that you're in.
So 12 of the 20 inches had to do with the facade plus the existing condition. There's a 4-foot wide sidewalk and an area of grass and trees between the sidewalk and the street. I can appreciate the variance and relief that was provided for the additional 8 inches, but there's sufficient area for pedestrians to move safely.
That's not the question. That is not the question. Again, we granted a variance in order to allow this because our code did not permit it, and the redevelopment plan did not permit it to be that close.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
It's not a question of whether there's sufficient ground. It's not a question of how the facade was designed. It's a question of the fact that we allowed it to look the way that it did because of this lift and slide system that has now gone away. So the reason that we allowed it to encroach, the reason that we allowed it not to comply with what we originally wanted is now gone.
So, Mr. Chairman,
you don't want to go back to the original requirements of the zone because it's cost you too much to do that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think I'm not clear on this point. I don't recall that and maybe you might disagree with me. I don't recall that the exterior facade design was a compromise, that there was a different design.
I do. I was sitting on the board, Mr. Troutner. I was chair of the board at that time. I'm one of the few people who were on the board at that time who were still on the board. And I remember this was a long, drawn out process over years. I was also on the committee that worked trying to get the design on the facade in line. So I have a very specific recollection about everything that happened here.
But again, Mr. Chairman, look, the encroachment was,
All I asked Mr. Troutner was a question. Is my understanding correct? Of what you're presenting to us, your client has gotten, and he has given the basis for this application. And I have asked you if my assessment of that, of this application is correct.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to aggravate. What can you? I apologize. I think I may have lost the question.
That's a yes or no question.
What is the question, Mr. Chairman?
Is the only reason why we're being asked to allow the variances to remain in place, now that the reason for them is gone, is the fact that it costs too much. Put it back. That there's no other way to do it because it costs too much.
Well, Chairman, I'm not trying to dance, but in addition to money, there is a question of time. I can't even assess how long that it would take to resolve this issue. And I think there is some planning impetus to want to see this garage reach its conclusion. We can certainly come back with planning testimony if the board wants to hear it. From a hardship standpoint, I mean, I would argue that while I think you're articulating you don't think we have any solid planning reasons to continue to build the garage as build it, I'm not sure I could articulate, even if I was on the other side of the table, what the planning reason would be to have us take down the building to correct this. But again,
you don't have to take down the building, Mr. Troutner. All you have to do is take down a portion of the front in order to move it back. And you're telling us that there's no way to do that.
Well, look, all things are possible with money. With money, we could demo the building and
There's
build.
no way to do that without spending a ton of money that your client doesn't have or doesn't want to spend.
Mr. Chair, I think I've answered your question. Unfortunately, I know it's you don't like the answer, but I understand that.
Well, you said you didn't want to dance, Mr. Troutner, but you put the record on and it's still playing. You know, so no, I think I understand what the answer is. And, you know, I hope your client is prepared to demonstrate to us, you know, exactly that there's no alternative but to leave that structure in place.
I understand, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any other questions from the board? What about the public?
All right, hold on, I'm going to open this up to the public. Okay, we have two members of the public, Mr. Schwartz and a call-in user. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep, I can hear you.
Mr. Traubner or the gentleman witness, are you aware that the basis for the framing built was to accommodate the lift system, and that it was built prior to an approval of the exterior facade before the board has approved that, and then requested the board agree to different exterior materials as a result of a hardship claimed when in fact the developer had acted prematurely and put up a structure that couldn't accommodate materials that the board wanted? Are you aware of that, sir?
I would respectfully disagree with that characterization.
Mr. Traubner, you sat in a hearing with the chair, myself, and Mr. Rooney, and heard three board members advise you the structure, the exterior details the board sought were different than the ephes your client had proposed. Are you aware of that, sir?
Yes, my recollection was there was discussion regarding exterior facade elements, including a question about whether or not ephes or the definition of stucco, I remember, was bandied around quite a bit.
No, sir, did not the members of the Development Review Committee specifically request precast concrete to match the Church Street structure, and were advised by you and your client that the developer had prematurely put up steel structure to accommodate the lift system, and that could no longer accommodate precast concrete.
I don't agree with the characterization about that somebody had put something up prematurely or without approval, although candidly, the history of this thing, and I wasn't the attorney for the whole going way back, so maybe you know something I don't, but I don't recall that. I do recall that there was an issue in terms of the request for certain precast concrete and the weight limitations related to the lift and slide mechanism. That part I do recall.
Were you aware, sir, that the board members reviewing the plans at the time believed that based on the placement of precast concrete in the plans, that they had believed that that is what was being proposed, and that it was placed in a way that confused board members, only later to find out that the better precast concrete was not being used for the exterior? Are you aware of that, sir?
I recall that there were allegations made about of things that were mislabeled on plans, and my recollection was those allegations were unfounded, but beyond that, I don't recall.
Further, sir, notwithstanding the chairman's pointing out that the structure was moved ahead, was extended out to accommodate the lift and slide, since you're now proposing to not provide the lift and slide system, could not the structure that's there now accommodate the better quality precast concrete rather than the cheap and inferior EIFS that your client claimed as a hardship at the time?
So I guess my first response would be my client is not using cheap and inferior EIFS. That was never something that was agreed upon. So I disagree with the question from its foundation. However, if you're asking me from an engineering standpoint, if you eliminate the lift and slide, could the facade be redesigned and now include precast concrete in places where previously it couldn't? I don't know the answer to that question, but to the extent the answer previously was wherever precast concrete was being sought and couldn't be because of weight issues with the lift and slide, obviously we eliminated the lift and slide, or need to eliminate the lift and slide.
Well, I heard the chair mentioned that stucco was the compromise materials proposed. So again, since the board had agreed to a compromise EIFS stucco as opposed to the precast concrete again, and you are not now providing the precast concrete on steel that had been prematurely built prior to an approval of the exterior, should you not now provide precast concrete to create a better looking exterior rather than the inferior EIFS that was agreed to because the board was not aware that that's what was being proposed?
Well, again, we're going back to 2017, but I believe the planning board approved stucco as part of the application. And there was an argument that took place with the planning board revisions committee in terms of architectural review. And that led to the approval of ultimately the material that that body approved. I've lost your. I think I've checked your question in that it fundamentally suggests that that stucco wasn't approved in the first instance.
Well, sir, I think you're circular speaking around what I said. The agreed, and this is my final point. The agreed EIFS was the compromise because the steel structure had been provided and could not accommodate both the weight of the lift and slide and precast concrete. Again, sir, if you're requesting leaving that steel structure in place in the same forward position it no longer needs to be, should you not have already determined whether the precast concrete rather than the agreed compromise stucco could be put back, which is what the board and committee wanted? That's my question. I leave it at that.
Again, I don't think the board, I think the board approved stucco. And obviously, look, our application this evening doesn't seek to alter with the facade. Obviously, if the board is indicating that it has concerns about this application, and I guess maybe we'll be revisiting some of those issues. But as of right now, our application stands as what it is. It's not an application to amend the approved facade for the structure.
Could I just say, I was a little disappointed looking at the plans that you provided, that there is no picture of what this looks like. You're just seeing the metal frame, and I gather that that's going. So what ultimately is the face of this garage going to look like?
It will look, I'll let Mr. Barry speak, but I believe it'll look exactly like the approved rendering from 2017.
That's correct. That is the intent.
Have included that. There are new members on the board here, and it would be nice to look and see what that looked like.
I have a suspicion we may be coming back, so we can probably provide that information.
There are no more members of the public on the line, so.
Sorry. Mr. Troutner, you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our next witness would be Tim Tracy from Desmond Engineering. And we would seek Mr. Tracy qualified as an expert in engineering.
Mr. Tracy, are you there?
I'm here.
Sir, would you please raise your right hand? You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please do state your full name and business affiliation for the record.
Sure. Timothy Tracy, T-R-A-C-Y. I'm a principal at Desmond Design Management. So my history with this project, as well as parking structures in the township of Montclair, go pretty far back. Just as a bit of background, Desmond Design Management, we are parking consultants, architects, and engineers. Our specialty is parking structures. I first started working as a representative of Desmond as a principal, going back to the Mountainside Parking Structure Edition. In 2012, I was also the principal involved with the initial alterations of what's now called the Orange Road deck, or the application before you tonight. I've also been the principal in charge on Desmond's design work for 3 structures that were designed for the township: the Bay Street Garage, the Crescent Street Garage, and the soon to be constructed and finished, hopefully, Midtown deck. So that's kind of my history. I've testified before this board on multiple occasions, the zoning board, as well as various committees and the mayor and council over the past 15 years.
And Mr. Tracy, could you just give the board just briefly a benefit of your, I guess, educational and professional qualifications so we can seek to have you qualified as an expert in design of parking structures?
Yeah, sure. I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from New Jersey Institute of Technology. I am a member of the International Parking Institute Consultants Council, a member of the Consultants Council of the National Parking Association. Both are the industry standards. And again, I've testified before this board on numerous occasions, as well as throughout the state of New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, we would offer to have Mr. Tracy qualified as an expert in the field of parking structure design.
We'll accept it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Tracy, you're familiar with the subject of tonight's application. I think you just testified a few moments ago.
Yeah, we said I've been involved back starting in 2012 with the original application for this project, where it was a conversion of the existing DCH garage, which was a storage garage for basically for the car dealership, and the conversion of that garage into more of a self-park facility to support the adjacent development.
And Mr. Tracy, you designed were involved in the design of the plans that were submitted as part of this application, the proposed amendments to the garage to, as a result of the elimination of lift and slide, to extend certain floor plates, as I previously mentioned.
Yeah, so we were re-engaged by the applicant to evaluate the opportunity to replace the deck extension, which was previously being considered as a mechanical parking system with a lift and slide system, and the feasibility of with the removal of the lift and slide, the extension of the parking decks, and from an engineering perspective as well as just from a parking functional perspective, to see how that could work with the existing functional plan of the deck, and then to help evaluate what would be the parking capacity increase on the 6 levels. So if it's okay, I'll just briefly go through level by level and just kind of highlight what the proposal will accomplish on each level.
And Mr. Tracy, and part of that I was going to ask you to do that, and if you could just sort of highlight as you go, sort of how the circulation will operate to the extent it's changing or staying the same, be appreciated.
Sure. I mean, generally speaking, the functional plan and the traffic circulation that exists today will largely remain unchanged with the planned conversion or extension of the decks. The ramping will stay the same. All the pedestrian elements will remain as is. The ground level, which is on the screen currently, really remains unchanged, other than the change to the on the Orange Road side of the property, or on the west side of the deck. There will be a series of parallel or perpendicular parking spaces that will be achieved. And ingress and egress will remain as originally planned, both from Valley Road as well as from Orange Road. So there's really effectively no change on the circulation. As we move up to the second through 4th levels, again, we're able to extend the parking bays that run in the east-west direction by basically by the width of the lift and slide, which for all intents and purposes, it's about 18 feet on the south side of the garage. And there is a bit of a skew as you move north along the deck. It skews out to about almost 19 feet at the existing stair tower. So what we'll do is, again, we'll introduce a row of self-parking stalls along the Orange Road facade. Spaces are all identified as 8'6" by 18 feet. That gives us the ability to park 3 cars between the existing structure, the existing columns. The one benefit that this proposal will have on the circulation, currently as you enter each level from the ramp, which is on the north side of the deck, you can only turn into the first parking bay, or the bay immediately to the south of the ramp, because the parking, in order to maximize the parking efficiency, it really is, further east into the property, or into the deck, I should say. So by pushing that row of parking further east, we get a much clearer 2-way drive aisle, both entering and exiting the ramp. So as on the up cycle and as well as the down cycle. So if you're coming up the ramp and traveling, from ground to second to third, and so on, you now can continue to go south and either enter the first parking bay to the south, or go all the way to the south, and exactly as Janice is so eloquently pointing out, Again, it just helps. It will improve the circulation that exists today. On the 5th level, because of the way the deck is currently designed with no change to the 6th level, this is the condition, if you will, that you see that currently exists on the other levels, where we have parking that is introduced along Orange Road, so therefore the deck really turns into the first parking bay. That condition really can't be changed here because there's an egress there that currently exists between the 5th and 6th level, because I'm sure you're aware the 6th level of the roof of this garage steps back to the east. So if we can just maybe go to the 6th level plan, just to highlight that, you can see there's no plan to extend the 6th level deck as part of this application. So in order to provide a second means of egress for pedestrians and from the building code and the fire code, we need that second stair, which is currently constructed on the west elevation. So therefore, if we just jump back to the 5th level, we don't have the ability to continue that north-south drive aisle. So therefore, on this level, which my understanding is the 5th level's really been allocated or designated for the hotel. So this level, most of the time, if not all the time, is really to provide valet parking support for the hotel. So there is a series of tandem parking spaces along the Orange Road facade. 9 of the spaces are tandem, which are basically back-to-back parking spaces. That, simply put, is what the extension of the slabs on and the ground level on levels 1 through 5, how the circulation would change as a result of modifying the area which was previously identified for the lift and slide to just flat deck extensions, and really could accommodate an increase in the self-parking capacity of those 5 levels.
And Mr. Tracy, could you just identify, I think it's probably on the ground level, the any electrical vehicle charging stations and zip car locations?
Sure. So there's my understanding. Oh, this isn't the plan. Janice, we submitted there you go. Thank you. So we our understanding that there's 3 spaces that are dedicated for zip cars. They are along the southernmost parking bay. And then there's 3 electrical vehicle charging stations for 3 spaces on the northernmost bay. So it's a total of 6 specialty, if you will, parking spaces to accommodate those vehicles.
And Mr. Chairman, I actually don't have any further questions for Mr. Tracy, but certainly if the board has questions in the public.
Members of the board?
Yeah, I have a question. So the concept plan that we looked at from Mr. Giosa, I'm not quite clear looking at this, if those specialty spaces, the charging spaces and the zip car spaces, are those part of the 48 spaces that are allocated to the public at all times?
I'm not sure in terms of how so I'm probably not the right expert to answer that question.
So I guess we can have that question answered by a subsequent witness, but although there's no, this is on the first floor, there's no Board of Education spaces on the first floor of the garage.
Yeah, my understanding, these are just general public spaces.
I'm sorry, so this is the first floor, not the ground floor?
I'm sorry, I'm saying.
Ground floor, yeah, the ground is, we're referring to ground and first is the same.
Okay, so the ground floor, first floor is where the Board of Education spaces are, the 48 spaces that the town has that are open to the public at all times.
So I guess two things I would note there. The ground floor, the Board of Education spaces are not on the ground floor, and they're on higher floors, and they are for the Board of Education.
I have a couple of questions. In the bottom left, there's a number of ADA spaces. Is that an ADA entrance and exit in that corner?
Yes, that's how they exit the structure next to the existing stair.
And somebody who's handicapped can also get in that doorway. It's unlocked at all times.
That's my understanding, yes.
Or, well, will it be? I mean, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm looking for some assurances that it's actually going to work.
Those are existing, so there's no change proposed to the for the accessible parking spaces as part of this application.
Okay. And I noticed on column 1C, there's a number of columns that intrude into the parking space. How far do they intrude on that what appears to be an 18-foot parking space?
Yeah, that column nominally is a 2-foot column, so it would be a 1 foot intrusion into the parking. And again, that parking layout and all of this existing striping is what exists today. There's really no change other than the extension to the Orange Road on the west side.
But isn't part of this application discussing whether or not this deck can fully park the intended uses? So wouldn't the size of a parking space, be important to that? And as I'm zooming in on that column in particular, it looks like that full 2-foot column is within that parking space. So what kind of cars can park in a 16-foot parking space?
Yeah, but we also have to look at the drive aisle. The drive aisle is much bigger in that parking bay. It's 27 feet, where you're only required to have 24 feet for two-way circulation. So effectively, you really have another 3 feet or 1.5 feet on each side, which would provide sufficient clearance. And really, at the end of the day, you effectively have an 18-foot deep stall.
Janice, which space is Mr. Brodock talking about? Can you show us on the?
Do you understand that explanation? Because I didn't.
Yeah.
So if you go to
zoom in to that bay,
C3.
Okay.
It's on column line C.
Yeah, that bay. If you can zoom in there.
Cross line is 3.
Here?
Yeah, so you can see that the 18 feet is actually measured. Typically, it's measured to the center line of the column, but the adjoining drive aisle is 27 feet, where only 24 feet is required. So it's just a pavement marking.
Chair Wynn, what I'm understanding from the witness is that if a car is sticking out 2 feet into the aisle, it's okay because there's extra width in that aisle.
Correct. And again, what we were kind of, when we went back in 2012, when we tried to, develop this plan, and when we did develop this plan, we worked with the existing structure that was already there. So that's why, some of these drive aisles are oversized, just because the way the structure was built for the former, car dealership.
Yeah, I understand there may be challenges with the way the layout was, but you're here now, and I wasn't here in 2012 either, so I'm asking the questions to make sure this still works. I mean, you're presenting a whole layout here that you're asking us to approve, and that's part of the layout. So these are questions we need to ask to make sure it actually is going to work as presented.
Of course.
If you kind of look at the bottom right where somebody might enter from, is that Central Verde Drive, how do they know whether to kind of go straight into the first floor or take a right to go upstairs?
Yeah, I believe there's signage that advises the occupants in terms of what either driveway, what each driveway provides in terms of access to the facility.
Can you give me a little bit more information? What do you mean?
Yeah, I would defer to the operator who's more familiar with the signage that's currently in place.
We can we can have Mr. Sokich testify this, but I believe there are signage and parking arms there that he can speak to. And again, we can answer all these questions, and because obviously this is a garage that's currently in operation with all these details.
There's signs advising. I know, when we originally designed the garage, there were signs advising how to get to the upper levels and how to get to the ground level, and then how to circulate back throughout the facility.
I have a question, if it's possible.
Carol, proceed.
Okay. Assuming that the board does not keep the variance that was granted in order to accommodate the parking slip and slide, what is the impact on the number of parking spaces that will be available if we use the original footage as opposed to the one that was granted via variance? Can you tell me or show us what parking spaces count will be remaining and where the impact will be?
Yeah, I guess if someone could help me with the reduction in the Orange Road facade would be, or what setback would be eliminated, or how much?
So I guess, Ms. Wilson, I think I know what the answer to the question is going to be, but if Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll try and help Mr. Tracy with this. I guess the question would be, if we were to eliminate 16, right now we encroach 20 inches into the right of way. If we were to eliminate 16 of those inches encroaching into the right of way, I guess pulling the facade back by relocating the foundations and the footing, or taking those out and redoing those along Orange Road to pull everything back 16 inches. My guess is you're going to tell me that actually we're not going to lose parking spaces, but I'll let you answer that question.
Yeah, Janice, if you could just slide back a little bit so we can get the whole Orange Road facade. So what happens is, because again, as you kind of look at this Orange Road elevation, or Orange Road building line, it skews from south to north. So if we bring it back, 16 inches, I think we'll probably lose 3 spaces between column line F and column line E2. And then because the way the garage was constructed, as you move north, you start to pick up some dimension. So my guess would be, without looking at it in great detail, that we would probably lose 3 spaces per floor.
That brings up kind of an interesting question for me. Does the property line, is it parallel to what looks like it's referred to as the center line here? Is that the property line?
I can't say that. I can't say with certainty.
Because what I'm wondering is the actual 16-inch encroachment. Actually, I think I have it as a 20-inch encroachment overall, but whatever it is that really only along column line A, as opposed to extending all the way over to column line F?
Again, we were not involved with the design of the lift and slide system and how it was and how that column line was developed. So I can't say with certainty where the property line currently exists, and how much of this deck is extended beyond the property line. We were asked to evaluate what could be achieved by extending the decks within the existing structure.
So, Mr. Tracy, if you're looking on your drawing here, I guess at the, well, I'll call the top, there's it looks like a exit, two-way. Is that onto Orange Road? I just orientate myself.
Yes.
Okay, so that's Orange Road. So that's where the encroachment would be. It's along from column line A to column line F, and I guess your point would be you're not sure about the entirety of from F to A, how many inches at each interval, we may be over. It goes up to, so the whole building is 4 inches over because that's how it was built. It was built 4 inches into the right of way. And I guess at some point, and I'm going to guess as you approach A, it's getting closer to being 20 inches into the right of way. And I'm guessing as you get back to F, maybe it's less than 20 inches. But we could try and get the answer to that question for you, Mr. Brownick. But I guess that's the thing we don't know, Mr. Tracy, if I understood your testimony correctly.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the 20-inch encroachment is uniform from column line A to F, or if it's 20 inches at A and goes down to an inch or nothing at column line F. I'm just not familiar with that approval.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to understand that just because it may actually mean that there's no parking lost if say it's 20 inches more skewed to the A line as opposed and 4 inches perhaps on the F line, that maybe no parking was lost. So I'd like to understand that. Dennis, if you go to drawing A103, which I think is the third PDF, third page in this packet, it's the 5th level parking plan, Mr. Tracy, and
right
at the very top, there's some gray shading in front of some of the parking spaces, kind of near that secondary egress.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what those are and what does it mean for how those spaces are parked?
Yeah, so the gray shading is basically to provide guidance and pavement markings for entering and exiting the 5th level. So you have to, and that's kind of what exists on all of the other floors currently. So as you come off the ramp, you're required to kind of make a 180-degree turn back into that first parking bay. So that's to guide motorists coming in and off the ramp to to really circulate to and from the first parking bay immediately to the south of the ramp.
Will some of those cars that are parked in that new deck extension area, are they going to kind of butt into that travel lane as it kind of appears from the drawing?
Yeah, so they're going to use the circulation lane to get in and out of spaces, which is consistent with all the other parking bays. It's no different as if you were traveling as you come off the ramp and come down into that first parking bay, that you're using both the drive aisle to circulate through the deck, as well as get into and out of the parking spaces.
Okay, so those are just, as you said, those were pavement markings. They're not hard concrete or anything
Correct.
like that. Okay.
Yeah, they're just to provide a little bit more guidance for the motorists to try and keep them in the lanes as designed.
Okay, those were all my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Sure, I understand.
Was that?
Carmel. Yeah. So if we allow you to have it's 20 inches of variance, and you have to push back the parking deck when you remove the lift and slide. If you go back to one of the lower level parking floors, I believe you would have to push the parking the drive aisle would lose a foot or more, foot and a half. So you wouldn't have your 24 feet drive aisle. So it would make the project kind of unworkable. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, Janice, if you can just go to the next plan. Yeah, go to the next level. No, not 102, if you could. There you go. No, because we gain area as you go from south to north, so you can see that we're actually have much greater than 18 feet from the edge of the back of the column to the edge of the structure. And
So
as we
it's a longer parking spot than 18 feet. Is that what you're saying?
you have more dimension from the back of the space to the edge of the structure.
And considering that the edge of the structure would not have the allowed 20 inches, I believe.
Right. So if we pull that northwest corner back, we still have 18 feet. We have, probably 24. We probably have 2 feet before we start to encroach on the 18-foot depth.
Okay, so my point is then if we tell you guys you have to go back and we're not, you're not going to get your extra 16 inches, I guess it is, this plan, the way it's outlined now, would still work.
No, I think on the south side, again, if in fact the 16-inch encroachment is uniform along the entire Orange Road elevation, we'll lose 16 inches in those spaces where we don't have, on the south side, where we really don't have any additional length.
I get you. Yep, I get you.
So that's why I think we would lose, we could study it, but for sake of discussion tonight, it appears like it's about 3 spaces.
3 spaces per floor.
3 spaces per floor, yeah.
So you're talking 18 spaces.
I'm just gonna mute my phone.
But not on what's being shown on 102, because those last 3 spaces, 2 of them are striped. Right? On the plan that we're just looking at now?
They're not usable anyway, even with this plan, is what you're saying.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, it does. Mhm.
Sorry about that. No, those 2 spaces are striped. They're just existing. That's why they're hashed.
What do you mean they're just existing?
They're existing, so those 2 in the corner are existing because the deck goes to that column line. So those spaces are there currently. We don't have them. We don't have them to the left or to the top of column line 1. Those are the new spaces.
I don't know. That doesn't make any sense from your previous explanation about what was hashed out here and what was not. You said that the hash marks were just guides.
This is very unclear. I mean, it really is.
Well, there's no parking. No, there's no parking. Yeah, in the corner, there's no parking. That's a dead area. But I think we would. Excuse me?
And you're agreeing with us?
I'm agreeing with you, yes. But I still think we would lose maybe 3 spaces traveling from south to north. Now, we wouldn't lose them on the 6th level because we don't have, the deck is not extended on the 6th level. So it would be grade and, 5 levels of parking.
All right, well, you'll come back to us with the exact number anyway.
Just so I understand it, since you said it, in your proposal, why isn't the 6th level treated the same way as the other levels with an extension for more parking?
Because there's no structure currently.
Well, there's no supporting structure that would hold.
Correct.
Yeah, all right, and that could be built.
It could have been, but the foundations have already been cast and constructed without that added level. So the foundations that currently exist couldn't support any additional load.
But yet they could support the metal lift and slide.
Correct.
That's less heavy than a couple of,
It is because there's no floor slab, so there's no concrete.
Okay.
So the added load from the concrete is is really what we did do the analysis, and that was what we concluded.
It won't, the removal of the metal from the lift and slide system, of the additional weight that was going to, because right now there's just a frame, but there's going to be whole mechanisms that are going to be installed. That's not going to offset the weight of the concrete for one.
No.
Just to follow on John's question, to be clear here, you are going to remove all of the lift and slide structure.
Not all of it. Some of it will remain. Everything on the new column line on Orange Road will remain. So what we're going to do is we're going to construct new structure from the Orange Road column line back to the existing column line 1.
And you're going to leave the steel columns in place?
The steel columns will remain in place, yes. We're going to basically create new beams and floor slabs from what's shown as, just the column line west of column line 1 back to the existing column line 1.
So you're going to use the metal that currently is projected to hold the lift and slide thing for your platforms. Is that correct?
Those columns will remain. Again, we're going to basically create new beams connecting the existing to the proposed.
So if we don't agree that you can have your 16 or 20 inches, can you still use that metal frame and just push it back, or do you have to do something?
It would have to be demolished and entirely, and we would need to, at a minimum, enlarge the foundations or construct new ones.
And Mr. Tracy, I'm not clear on what the answer is going to be to this, but I think some of that steel that's on that column line support on Orange Road, that's also in place to support the facade, correct?
Yes. Yes. That column line will serve two purposes: A, to support the facade, and B, to provide the vertical steel for the slab extensions.
Okay.
Further to the Mr. Schwartz's point, if you're taking out this metal lift and slide, and we compromised on the look of the facade, I would think that you might want to go back to the drawing board and change your facade, since you have to do a lot of work on that Orange Road side anyway, to make it more blending in with the neighborhood.
Yeah, that would. I don't believe that steel was designed specifically for the facade that's been proposed and approved by the planning board. If it changes, I can't say with certainty if that existing structural steel could support additional load. More than likely, it wouldn't be able to, because generally speaking, you engineer the structure to support only that which is required.
I think you're putting the part before the horse, because I don't think that's the way that it was erected, but we can revisit that also.
I have a question. At the street level, you might be able to enhance the appearance of the that wall. Maybe not going all the way up.
The question I have is, the existing steel that you put up along Orange Road was to support the lift and slide. By using the EFA system, which is really a lightweight thing, it's just lightweight steel, doesn't weigh that much. You're going to be using the steel put in place to support the slabs that you're putting in place?
Yes, with all of the horizontal reinforcement. All new beams and deck slabs.
So you're going to be using a port and place system with drilling and rebar to support. You're not going to use a precast concrete and drop it in.
No, because it couldn't be erected. It's just too tight of a corridor, so it's all cast in place.
Well, I have nothing to There's nothing supporting, there's nothing out there. Just got some steel.
We couldn't get it. We couldn't get a crane to erect it.
Really?
To erect the precast inside between the existing garage and the steel frame that's been constructed. So it's a cast in place.
With things that you don't have a roof, you can just drop it right in. The question I have is the hatched area at the west side of the parking is what?
That's an area that we typically don't stripe to try and keep the cars off the frame. So it's a pavement marking.
It's a pavement marking feature. So if you put in parking bumpers there, they would be in that location.
It effectively would be the same location, correct?
We're losing a lot of, I mean, you're asking us to keep all of this stuff that we had agreed that is on variance, and we're still losing, it looks like 64 parking spaces for not having the lift and slide. Right?
That's correct. Our next witness, Michelle Bryhoff, will testify about that in more detail. But Mr. Bruni, you are correct. I think, as I said in my opening, we're going from 614 down to 550 as functionally as a result of the loss of the lift and slide.
Okay. Don't have any more questions.
Anyone else from the board have questions? Yes. Your mic on?
Thank you. It's Mike Dannemiller. I have a question about level 5. If Janice, if you could switch to that slide. Just go down one. Yeah, there. On the exit move, when vehicles are approaching the top right corner, they're coming around that curve. What kind of radius is provided to go from that big swooping curve onto the down ramp? It appears to be an angle point.
Yeah, that's all existing. So we're not really changing that. We're not changing the functional plan and access to it from the decks as a result of this proposal. So it's probably the depth of the space and a little bit. So it's probably about a 20-foot radius. And that's the exact condition that exists on levels 2 through 4 currently.
Isn't this unique on 5? Because on levels 2 through 4, you can approach it on a parallel to Orange Road, but here you're going to the west and having to basically do a 180. But the last part, it's a sharp angle once you reach column row B.
Yeah, it's only on this level proposed. It's on levels 2 through 4 existing.
Mm-hmm.
With the deck extension, we're able to correct that or change that, if you will. But as it exists today, it's exactly as it's illustrated on the 5th line.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public of this witness concerning his testimony so far?
Yes.
Mr. Schwartz, your microphone's on.
Yes, sir. Do you believe that it's a hardship if the applicant built the steel structure to accommodate the lift and slide system prior to getting any approvals for the exterior and facade, now can't deliver the lift and slide system, but still claims that the steel reinforcement that's there and has to be enhanced to accommodate the new floors still can't accommodate the better facade that the board sought at the time prior to agreeing to a compromise EFA system. Is it your opinion that that's still a hardship?
Hold on. I'm going to object to the question to this witness. This witness has not been offered as an expert in professional planning, and the term hardship is a planning issue. So we can get to that in testimony that's yet to be offered, and the question could be circled back to, but I would suggest that Mr. Tracy is the wrong witness to answer that question.
Mr. Tracy did state that the structure put up could not accommodate any exterior precast concrete. So he already knows what the weight load is. So I'm asking him in his opinion if that makes sense logically as a hardship.
Well, I don't think we want to have a common sense discussion of hardship. I think we want to have a professional planning discussion of hardship. I mean, if you want to ask him a technical question about whether or not something can support weight, I think that's an appropriate question for his background as an engineer. But I feel like there's an effort to try and have an engineer offer planning testimony, which we haven't offered him to do.
Ask and answer.
Any other questions, Mr. Schwartz?
No, thank you, sir.
Any other members of the public? Questions?
There's no other members of the public.
Okay, I wasn't sure whether that was just temporary or because before I thought there were two. We had at least two others, but all right.
I bored him away.
I won't put that on your shoulders, sir. But it is 9:25, and I'd like to take a 5-minute recess. And then, Mr. Troutner, we can resume with your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Giosa, were you trying to say something? I see your lips moving, but I don't hear anything. You're really, I hear like a little buzz, but you're really, really low.
Okay. Does that help?
No.
Terry, I think you need to turn your volume up.
Yeah. Does that help?
It's getting better.
Okay.
Can you turn it up any further?
I'm going to try to switch.
Now we can't hear you at all.
I heard the first 3 words.
Is that any better?
That's a little better. You're about online with Keith because Keith is very faint also.
Okay, I'll try to speak up.
Okay.
That'll work.
Okay. I have a question, Tim, about the public parking. Where is the public parking area?
Yeah, I'm not to not answer, but I think, you know, the parking operator would probably be more served to identify how the garage is operated.
We'll have Mr. Sokic speak to that question, Mr. Joseph, because I can't remember. I think it's on the 2nd or 3rd floor, but I don't want to testify prematurely, and I think Mr. Sokic can speak directly since he operates the garage.
Okay. If they are on the 2nd or 3rd level, if we could go to Plan A102, Janice, if you don't mind. Okay, similar to what Mr. Dannemiller mentioned, if I'm a public parker and I'm parked on this level of the garage, and I want to make a right turn and exit the garage and go down the ramp, isn't my turn going to swing into oncoming traffic on that ramp?
Again, that's an pre-existing condition. And
Okay.
that's the way the garage currently functions.
Okay, so I think the answer is yes.
Well, it's certainly improved with with having the straight shot from south to north.
Okay. Well, I do believe that those public parkers would swing into oncoming traffic, and that's, you know, if it were people that were going to be using the garage, you know, every day, local residents and so forth, they would kind of get used to that. But if I'm a public parker and I wanted to use a public space, it's my first time in the garage, that could be kind of a hairy turn. Would you, if I'm a public parker using the garage for the first time, don't you think it would be better if they were parked on the ground level of the garage so they didn't have to negotiate that turn on the ramp, that hairy turn on the ramp?
Mr. Jones, I'm sorry, I just want to clarify the question. You're saying public parkers visiting the garage for the first time, but I apologize, maybe I lost it for a second. I thought we were talking about the Board of Ed spaces.
Well, they're public parking. They're the township spaces that could be used by the public when they're not in use by the Board of Ed.
So I don't want to have a semantic argument on this, but the parking license agreement, which speaks for itself, denotes these as for the Board of Ed use, which I believe the applicant can give proximity cards for the Board of Ed parkers, but they're not. I mean, they can be, I guess, if somebody from the Board of Ed is not there, somebody from the public parks, as if anybody from the public, I guess, comes in and out of the garage. But I guess I wasn't sure that the question in terms of separating like a member of the public parking in a publicly available garage versus the Board of Ed space as having a distinction.
Well, they are quote unquote the township spaces, and members of the public are entitled to park in the township spaces, and the township is entitled to the revenue stream produced by those township spaces when not in use by the Board of Education, which is fairly often. They're not in use at night, they're not in use on weekends, over the summer and so forth. So
I don't want to, I don't know if this is the place really to have this argument. I understand that's your read of the parking license agreement, but that's not the, or at least that's not my read, and certainly not the applicant. And my understanding, that's not actually the township attorney's read of the parking license agreement. So again, I don't know.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On the first floor, aren't there public parking spaces on the first floor?
Well, in terms of, yes, in terms of the public coming to the garage parking,
Right.
correct.
The public using the Board of Ed spaces would still have to pay.
Correct.
Fee to come in. So it doesn't make a difference whether the spaces allotted to them are on the first or second floor. The public will have the right to park on the first floor. And if their spaces are full on the first floor, they'd have to go up to the second floor. And if the Board of Ed spaces were empty, they could use the Board of Ed spaces, but it wouldn't be using them for free. And it really wouldn't make a difference whether the Board of Ed spaces were on the first floor or the second floor, because you would still have that same member of the public using that space one way or the other.
From the circulation standpoint, correct. You could have members of the public parking on the first floor or members of the public parking on the second floor.
So I'm not sure, Jerry. I don't understand the question that you've posed. If it would be, I would understand it better if the first floor was only for private parking or valet or something like that. But if there's space on the first floor, the public parks there, and they don't go to the second floor, unless the first floor is unavailable, I would imagine, unless people just like to walk up and down stairs.
yeah, and well, I guess a lot of it has to do with my interpretation of the language in the lease agreement. I do think that. So
and maybe it goes back to the fact that on the original plan, on the original parking garage, I think those spaces weren't, public could use those spaces, but they weren't fee spaces, because you didn't. It was a private garage for the auto dealer at the time, so people could go in and out and use those spaces. And so that's why they were there up front, so that people could get to them easily. But with the reconfiguration, I thought that went away. So we can take another look at it and come back to it if necessary.
I have a question. I thought that the spaces that are the Board of Ed spaces or the public spaces, I thought there was supposed to be revenue that was collected that should go to the town. So how is that revenue collected if we don't isolate the spaces or, to be used that are the Board of Ed or the public or the township spaces, whatever you want to call them? How do you make sure that we're collecting that revenue? I mean,
I think that's where we're having an impasse in terms of the reading of the parking license agreement. But again, that's I guess I'd respectfully submit it. That's something between the township and the applicant. If the township's concerned about its interpretation of the agreement, then obviously that's a conversation between the township and the applicant.
Mr. Troutner, doesn't the town get revenue from the public spaces?
So the short answer is my understanding is the township charges the Board of Ed for the Board of Ed spaces, and the township retains the money it charges the Board of Ed for those spaces. In other words, the MAP doesn't incur or obtain income from that, but that's the only revenue issue. There's a separate revenue issue. I mentioned in the beginning that there's 48 Board of Ed spaces, and then there's 30 spaces that are leased back to the applicant. The applicant actually pays the township for those leased back spaces, but this is, again, I think different than what's been being talked about just now.
And so when a member of the public goes in and pays the fee for parking for an hour, who gets the revenue from that?
That goes to the applicant.
To the applicant?
Yeah.
100%?
Yes.
I'm just, I have a hard time with the interpretation. I'm just going to read it right here. It's only a couple of sentences. With the exception of the leaseback spaces, the township shall have exclusive use of the licensed spaces at all times. And the township shall be entitled to retain all fees and charges collected for usage of the licensed spaces by permitted users to the extent that licensee charges and collects fees.
Yeah. Okay, so clearly there's some confusion here. And let's go back, Mr. Troutner, if we can go back and maybe we can sort this out between now and the next meeting as to, because you said the township attorney also has an opinion on this and how this is working. And, clearly something's not adding up.
Yeah. So we can certainly circle back to it. The language that Mr. Joseph read is the language that talks about if the township is collecting money from the Board of Ed, that the township is entitled to retain all those fees and charges collected by the township from the Board of Ed. And there's other language in the agreement that talks about the definition of the permitted user, who's the township's employees and permitted designees. Again, in other words, the Board of Ed people. But again, we can talk about that offline. And
yeah, you can sort that out and then come back to us at the next meeting. All right. 5-minute recess, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
but we want to get all the important players back.
Or, I guess, traffic parking.
Okay. Do we have her set up, Janice?
Yeah, she is.
Ms. Bryhoff, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you please state your full name and business affiliation for the record?
Sure. Michelle Bryhoff, Michelle, last name Bryhoff, B as in boy, Riehoff, as in Frank. I'm a principal associate with Mazer Consulting. And we were tasked with preparing this parking assessment for the applicant. I'd be happy to state my qualifications for the record.
Yeah, Ms. Bryant, why don't you just quickly give the board the benefit of your background and education to be qualified as an expert in the field of traffic engineering?
Sure. So I have a degree in civil and environmental engineering from Northeastern University. I've been working as a traffic engineer for the last 12 years. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. My license is in good standing. I have testified in front of numerous boards. Unfortunately, I have not had the pleasure of testifying in front of this board, but some of the boards include Old Bridge, Wall, Randolph, Wayne, Colts Neck, East Brunswick, so on and so forth.
And you were qualified as a traffic expert in front of those boards?
Yes.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, we would offer Ms. Bryhoff as an expert in the field of traffic engineering.
We'll accept her.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Ms. Bryhoff, you're familiar with the subject of tonight's application. I think you indicated you prepared a traffic or a parking assessment on September 16th in conjunction with the application?
That's correct, yeah.
And you've had an opportunity to review the reports prepared by the board's consultants, including Ms. Talley's report, as well as reports prepared by Level G and NV5?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, great. If you could, Ms. Bryhoff, perhaps it's easiest to, I guess, start with talking about parking capacity before we get to, I guess, the subject of parking demand. And we had prepared for this evening some tables that were basically just capture information that were in Ms. Bryhoff's report, as well as other submissions as part of this application. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, we would mark this as, actually, Janice, I don't know if we've pre-marked anything, what this would be.
Let me go through the list of exhibits because I have pre-marked them. A1 is the application. A2 is the certification of taxes paid. A3 is the certification of publication. A4 is the affidavit of service. A5 is the 5-sheet site plan prepared by Desmond Associates dated June 23rd, 2020. A6 is the parking assessment report prepared by Mazer Engineering dated September 16th, 2020. A7 is the planning report dated December 23rd, 2020. A8 is the Level G parking report dated January 6th, 2021. A9 is the Level G report dated January 15th, 2021. And A10 is the NV5 report dated January 15th, 2021. So this will be A11.
A11, so we'll call this parking tables. Ms. Bryhoff, actually, I get, and Ms. Talley, I guess we would ask to actually go to the second page or table 2 to talk about capacity.
Actually,
Thank you. So, Ms. Bryant, if you could, I guess, just give the board an overview of what this exhibit shows, and as I guess illustrated previously in your report and in Mr. Tracy's, I guess, submission and testimony.
right. So what this table here shows is what the previously approved garage capacity was calculated to be. So based on the self-park calculations, we have a total of 375 spaces. The lift and slide would have provided 116 spaces. And then the level 5, which typically operates as a valet operation for the hotel, which yields approximately 123 spaces. So with that total, the previously approved garage capacity is 614 spaces. Now you will notice some parentheses there. We did calc out what level 5 could be if it were considered to be all self-park. However, as I noted, the hotel does operate the 5th floor and use it for their valet operations.
So
that is the, yep.
Yeah, so Ms. Bryant, functionally, I guess what we're talking about is we lose the 116, and then this is showing the self-park on floors 1 through 4 and 6, really as it exists without the floor plates being extended, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so then I think that brings us to table 3, which is the next page.
So this is what we are currently proposing, which is the capacity for the slab extension. With the self-park spaces, we have a total of 427 spaces. Again, that does not include level 5 because we are considering that the hotel valet operation, which is 123 spaces. So that gives us a total of 550 spaces. Now, again, that is a difference from the previously approved, but I will go through some of our calculations for that. So if, Mr. Troutner, if it's okay, I would like to just discuss some of the findings from our parking assessment as far as what the observed demand was, and then discuss, some of the reports that we've gone through and some of the exercises we've done to demonstrate that we can fulfill that capacity.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So what we did as part of our parking assessment is we compiled data that was given to us from ProPark. The ranges in the data were from January 1st, 2019 through April 20th, 2020. I'm sorry, April 30th, 2020. From that data, we again sorted through all of those numbers, all of that data. And what we were able to find was that the peak parking demand in the garage is 438 spaces. The 85th percentile demand, which is a little bit of a misnomer, which is the demand that occurs 15% of the time, is 315 spaces. And the average parking demand is 270 spaces. So based on the data that were provided from ProPark, we feel that the garage is currently operating well within the provided number of spaces and well within what we are proposing, which is the 550 spaces. Again, if we wanted to add a factor of safety of say 20% to our maximum observed demand, which would bring us from 438 spaces to 526 spaces, again, we're seeing that the capacity is still there within the proposed capacity. Now, bringing up, I did have the opportunity to speak with Mr. Giosa from Level G regarding his review of the project. From his report, he established what he would consider the absolute worst case scenario, which is if there was a function at the hotel, if there was other events going on, and what he determined the absolute peak parking demand to be was 687 spaces. And that's again from the Level G parking report dated January 6th, 2021.
And Ms. Bryant, just to clarify on that, you mentioned the 687, I guess, is the high peak demand. That's for special events, correct? That's not the...
Correct, yes. Yeah. The absolute doomsday scenario where there's all these events occurring at once, and he puts in a factor of safety and so on and so forth, and he comes up with 687. What we were able to review with ProPark is that we are able to accommodate an additional 140 spaces between the if we were to operate level 4 as a valet and level 6 as a valet, which would yield a total of 690 spaces. So with that, we feel confident that we would be able to accommodate this quote unquote doomsday scenario for the absolute parking demand. So with that, I mean, that concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or if I missed something, Mr. Troutner, I'm sure you'll.
I actually was just going to bring up 2 points, Ms. Bryan.
Sure.
So there was, you're aware there was an approval in 2012, correct, that had a phase 1 approval and then a preliminary approval for a phase 2. I believe the phase 2, which at that time maybe not as relevant as it is today because it didn't contemplate a hotel, but they were proposing an estimated valet parking that could go. Do you recall what that went to?
I believe it was somewhere in the 900 spaces range. I could be wrong.
Yeah, so actually, I thought they were estimating full valet parking as allowing 686. If that's.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're correct. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm thinking of a different number. Yes, 686 with the full valet operation.
Right, and I believe they were estimating a demand perhaps of 557 with shared parking credits at that time. Correct?
Yes, that was from the redevelopment plan for phase 2. Yes.
Right. And then I also wanted to point out, and I know you're familiar with Ms. Talley's memo. Ms. Talley had cited to a parking report that had been prepared in conjunction with the hotel application that was at the time projecting adjusted demands could be Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. to 12 a.m. It was at approximately 620 spaces.
Yes, and that's actually also in the level G parking assessment, where there's a low average of 506 spaces and a high of 620. So that is consistent with that. And again, that's kind of where that 687 absolute doomsday scenario calculation comes from, where, again, everything's kind of operating together. So, we feel more than confident we can accommodate the 620 spaces, especially if levels 4 and 6 were to operate as valet. And, we're confident that we could satisfy the 690 spaces as well.
Right. So I guess the long and the short of it is, Ms. Bryan, it's your understanding that the previous estimated demands would have had the applicant operating the deck in a valet scenario if necessary. And then if I was to refer you to table 1, which Janice is the first page of this exhibit, A11, what you're saying is we could still accommodate those by valet, but what we were seeing before COVID happened was a peak demand of 438. And you're saying even with an estimate that it could be 20% higher, that you still think that's coming in below the 550. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any further questions, but I'm sure the board does. So,
Members of the board.
I guess question. Oh, sorry, Keith. Go right ahead.
No, up to you. Okay. Ms. Bryhoff, could you take us through those numbers just one last time? What was originally approved with the lift and slide? What are you now proposing? And then kind of some of those other valet combinations.
Can I just say one more thing, though? Even before you get to what was approved with the lift and slide, what was approved in 2012 when this whole project was envisioned? And what has changed in the 2012 approval that caused more parking needs? Because many of us were not here to understand the development of the project, the evolution of the project. So this project as a whole was presented to a board in 2012 that approved the project, and there's numbers out there about what the parking is. And then what happened to increase the parking need? Was the hotel bigger than it was originally contemplated, or what? So I need to understand the evolution of the project, understand the evolution of the garage needs.
So Ms. Fryhoff, actually, if you're comfortable, maybe you could take us through that evolution. I guess maybe start with what the redevelopment agreement between the applicant and the township requires, what the 2012 approval contemplated both for phase 1 and phase 2, and to answer Ms. Laughlin's question, I guess up front, at the time of the 2012 approval, there actually was no hotel contemplated, and then that brings us, I think, to 2014. When the hotel was actually approved, we had some updated numbers, but maybe if you could just run us through those quickly.
Sure. So just to run the board through the redevelopment plan agreement from 2012, phase 1 called for 528 self-park spaces, including a credit of 15 spaces for 3 zip cars and 78 township allocated spaces. For phase 2, the maximum demand was estimated to be 557 spaces, whereas 686 spaces would be provided with valet. So that's kind of where we were from the redevelopment plan. Again, those numbers were based on shared parking credits, parking studies that were done at the time, all of which predate my involvement with the project, but that is my knowledge of the prior approval.
And then Ms. Fryhoff, I think the numbers are laid out in Ms. Talley's report. I think she attached at the conclusion of her report after page 7, a table which was at the time for the hotel application marked A35 Central Verde phase 2 parking report, that there was an increase in the adjusted demand based upon the hotel, correct?
Yeah, so that adjusted demand was increased to 620 spaces with the hotel.
At its peak, and then I believe it operates at a spread at some other times, ranging.
Yes. So the low, like I said, the low demand was 506 and the high was 620.
And then, and I guess the point we made before was that there was a capacity at the time of that hotel approval in 2014 of 614 spaces. There was a projected demand, at least at one time, an adjusted demand of 620, meaning that there would have been a deficit where you would have needed to do some valet parking. And then, of course, I think there was always a contemplation that there could be special events which could require additional valet parking. And that subject to valet parking goes back to the 2012 approval, correct? Where the idea was that you could go up to 686 spaces.
686, yes.
Correct. So that, I don't know if that fully answered the question in terms of the kind of the history of the numbers, but but then that brings us to, I think, back to Mr. Bruddock's question, which is, so what could you just run through again? What's the capacity in the garage now? And I think that's probably table 3 of your exhibit A11.
Yeah, so what we have currently in the garage, like I said, is 427 self-park spaces. The hotel, again, currently operates level 5 at 123 spaces with their valet operation, which brings us to a total of 550. So that's where we're at currently with the proposed slab extension, where we would be with the capacity of the garage. And that does not account for additional valet on levels 4 or 6.
So these capacity numbers may change depending on what the structural engineer determines with respect to that 20-inch encroachment. If that were to go away, what parking spaces would be available? This might change.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And what's the nature of the relationship between the applicant and the hotel? And I ask that kind of in terms of this idea of valet parking, because it obviously gives, some additional parking spaces, which, is a good thing here, clearly. But how does that go forward, in the future? What's the nature of that relationship?
That actually, Mr. Barry, I don't know if maybe actually a good time to actually ask him to answer that. Because the different entities, but maybe perhaps he could speak to I guess it's probably a contractual relationship.
That's correct. There is different entities, different ownership, but there is a contractual relationship between the hotel and MAP for utilization of the 5th floor of the garage. They have exclusive use of that floor of the garage.
And if they go away in the future, does that mean that valet operation goes away and you're down to 83 spaces of self-park instead of 123 for valet?
If the floor was to become self-park, yes, but the valet option has that capacity to, I guess, ramp up to that. Is that fair, Michelle?
Yes.
And to add to that, Mr. Barry, I guess, would it be fair to say that, just as for the same reason that the applicant to this application, it has an obligation to provide valet parking to meet parking demands on, levels 1 through 4 and level 6, if necessary to, although it's been testified you wouldn't need to do that much valet, but, that it could, if needed to meet demand, do that. If the hotel went away and level 5 suddenly was self-park again, then presumably the applicant could valet on the 5th floor as well, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So theoretically, no, even if the hotel went away, we don't lose parking spaces.
No.
So to sum that up, the applicant would provide full valet levels 1 through 6 if needed to meet demand.
But that's what our agreement requires.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to get at. I did have a question about just Ms. Bryhoff, you had put up the 85th percentile, and I just did have a question about that. As I was looking at the chart that was in your report, there were a number of days that were kind of missing from the middle of that graph. What happened there?
Well, that's actually, we did go back and forth with ProPark to actually ask that same question. And what we could determine is that it sounded like the gate may have been in an open position and miscalculating the number of vehicles entering and exiting the garage because we were seeing, numbers that were really unrealistic, especially just during this, 1 week or however yes, I believe it was 1 week worth of data that were just, it didn't seem to make much sense, especially looking at the rest of the data. So we chose to eliminate that data from our set, still giving us, a significant amount of data to look at.
Do you know what day the hotel opened?
I do not know the exact date. Maybe Mr. Barry or Mr. Troutner happens to know that exact date, but no, I do not know.
It was sometime in October or November, I thought, of 2019. I don't remember the exact date, but I thought it was in that window.
Yeah, and look, if memory serves me correctly, it's in that window that you've listed as invalidated due to operational conditions. And if memory also serves me correctly, someone testified in another application as to what the demand was on that particular day. And so now I'm kind of left wondering, well, was it inaccurate in the previous application or is it inaccurate now? And that's if my memory is serving me correctly.
We might be able to ask Mr. Sokich when he gets to this point of the testimony. My recollection was the hotel opened potentially in that October timeframe. There was a grand opening or party, I think, where there was a huge spike in the number of people in the garage, and then you had a sort of as the hotel rooms became sort of further online as you get later into the year of 2000. I guess that's 2019. the hotel begins to hit, full occupancy, and that's the kind of the same thing going into the first part of 2021. If that's, I don't know to the extent that's helpful.
Well, that was kind of my recollection, was somewhere around a peak of 413. And, that doesn't seem to be a wildly skewed value based on, looking at this chart. And I think you bring up an interesting point, Mr. Troutner, that, the hotel came online during this period of data that we're looking at from the beginning of 2019 through the end of April 2020. And I don't know if it's really fair to characterize that as all the same demand for purposes of statistics. It would seem to me that the applicable piece here is once the hotel is opened to say, beginning of March 2020 when the pandemic hits, that would be more representative of what we could expect in a time outside of this current pandemic for a parking demand when the hotel is operational and things are kind of moving forward with the different uses that are nearby. I suspect that there will be additional demand with the additional development just to the north of this one. Once that's put in place, even though that was parked in its own manner, I just happen to think that there will be people who will try to use this parking deck as well. So I just think the statistics may be a little skewed.
Right, and I do appreciate that, because that peak parking demand that I mentioned, which was that 438 spaces, actually occurred on February 29th, 2020. So again, right before, unfortunately, the pandemic began. But we were, from these few months of data where the hotel was open and it was pre-pandemic, we're actually able to capture what we observed to be the peak demand. And like I said, that was 438 spaces.
Right. It just becomes a much shorter window. I think that's part of my point as well, to kind of base these numbers on.
Understood.
I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Are there any spots at all in the garage that are reserved for anybody in particular, like the hotel manager or anybody like that? Are there any reserved spots?
To our knowledge, to Michelle and my knowledge, probably not. But actually, I think Mr. Sokic, who manages the garage, probably can answer hopefully that question directly when we have him testify.
Okay. Would he also be able to answer the valet employees? Where do they park when they come to work?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions from the board? Any questions from the public?
I just have a quick question.
Mr. Giosa.
Just a quick question about the number of valet spaces. If it's possible, if a plan could be provided that actually boxes out and shows each one of those valet stalls, because I'm coming up with slightly different numbers. So that would be helpful if those valet stalls can be blocked out so we could see them on a plan.
Understood. And I believe, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Troutner, but that will be provided from ProPark, correct?
We were intending to prepare a submission on that. Obviously, it wasn't ready for this evening, but we had a suspicion that we'd be coming back and would be able to present that.
Thank you.
And do you also plan on preparing the parking management plan that Mr. Giosa had recommended?
We can do both. That's the intent, is to kind of do both things.
Okay, thank you.
That would be kind of one combined item.
I have a question, Ms. Freihoff. Under what, I may have misunderstood your testimony, but under what circumstances would there be the need for the adoption of full valet parking for the entire structure?
So again, that's something that would be within the parking management plan. When the garage reached a certain capacity, then step one would be to convert these spaces to valet. When it reached an additional capacity, it would convert these next spaces to valet, and so on and so forth. So that would all be laid out in the parking management plan, and something that would be presented as part of that.
I see. Thank you.
Yes, no problem.
Mr. Nguyen, I've unmuted the public. So Mr. Schwartz, if you want to question this witness, go ahead. All right, hearing nothing. There you go.
All right, Mr. Troutner, you can proceed with your next witness.
Oh, actually, Mr. Chairman, I actually, at this point, I'd respectfully request perhaps we conclude this evening. My next witness would be Kristen Sokich, but I'm wondering if it might make sense, since we're coming back with a parking management report and exhibit that'll speak to valet, if perhaps we try and do his testimony with that in hand, and maybe that'll allow for a smoother testimony experience.
Fine with me.
Mr. Troutner, are you also going to come back with a visual of the front of the Orange Road?
Yes, we can. We can. I know there were a number of questions I wrote down that the different board members had raised, including that request that you had made for the facade. We can submit that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Janice.
I have two dates. I just want to throw these out. Right now, the outstanding application we have right now is still incomplete, so I can offer you February 8th or February 22nd.
My apologies. The hard part about doing these things virtually, it's hard to confer. Can you just hold on 1 second?
Sure.
Janice, I think we would respectfully ask to maybe move to the 22nd because if we do the 8th, I'm concerned it's not going to give us a lot of time to get things in 10 days in advance.
Okay.
All right. We will see you then.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay. We already did our committee reports. Bills.
Took a look at the bills and they seem okay to me, so I would move to approve them.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
All right, everybody, it's been fun. I missed being in the same room with you guys, but is what it is. So for the rest of the evening, and see you next time.
All right. Good night.
Good night, everyone.